Living longer, living healthier, living better than ever before. Welcome to Mountain Pacific's Healthy Living for Life, a weekly series that gives you the information, education, and expert insight you need to become an active participant in today's ever-changing healthcare climate. Here now is today's program host.
Natural disasters are tragic events that can level towns, destroy homes, and even take lives. But even after the storm blows over, the fire dies down, or the earth stands still again, health and safety concerns remain. Welcome to Healthy Living for Life, a show dedicated to helping you do just that. I'm your host, Lisa Sather. Today we talk about how natural disasters can impact your health in ways you may not know, and how you can prepare to help lessen their impact. Stay with us. Welcome back. Whether we're talking about wildfires, earthquakes, tornadoes, hurricanes, floods, or even volcanoes, natural disasters and severe weather can take toll on people's livelihoods. But the aftermath of these events can also take a toll on people's health. Joining us this morning is Matt Matlich with the Public Health Emergency Preparedness Program and Dr. Greg Holzman, the Montana Public Health State Medical Officer. Thanks for being here today, gentlemen.
Thank you.
Matt, let's start out with you and let's talk a little bit about your position title, what all that entails, and maybe then you can give us a little bit more information too about how you help coordinate with the local, state, and federal levels with your position as well.
Of course. So my position is a public health emergency manager, and I work for the Department of Public Health here in Montana, and that kind of fits in a few different ways with preparedness. And so in the public health sector, we prepare for influenza outbreaks, we prepare for other communicable disease outbreaks, and we work with epidemiologists and immunizations to help really prepare for if we ever need to do a response to something like that. We also work with locals as well. Everything should be local in an emergency, and so there are local emergency managers. At the public health side, also we have local emergency managers who plan for things like those wildfires and flooding, and help how we can either mitigate those risks or how we can even prevent them from ever happening.
Awesome.
It's also really interesting in the public health preparedness realm, how much coordination makes a huge difference, and people don't always think about it. I think a good example was when Katrina hit in New Orleans. A lot of well-meaning people ran to go there to say, hey, we can help. I have this skill, how can I help? But without somebody coordinating who's going where and where, getting the people that need the help and getting the people that can actually do the help is really important. Otherwise, you put more people into the risk of disaster. So public health preparedness is one, getting individuals to get ready to be prepared for whatever might happen. What are you going to do within your house and stuff like that, with your kids, with your pets, those kind of things. And then there's things at the state level of saying, so what do we need to have ready at different levels that we could go in and help a community that is working on the ground and help coordinate the movement or working so that the police are being able to do their job, the medical folks can be doing their jobs, the cleanup people can be doing their jobs, and we're not getting into each other's way, and we're doing the best that's there for the community. And then the feds come in and help us with that too, and they have more resources and they can fly in a plane with one thing Matt does is our strategic national stockpile of different medications, and he can talk about that. But doing those type of aspects, it's got to be open lines of communication. Communication usually is the downfall or the success of a response to almost every emergency. Excellent point. So Matt, do you want to talk a little bit about the medication stockpiling and what, while we're on that subject, that leads perfectly into that. So at the federal level, we have what's called the Strategic National Stockpile that is ran by the Assistant Secretary for Preparedness and Response. And what that stockpile is a cache of medications, also medical material for
for different types of events, mostly Category A agents such as anthrax exposures. But it also has medications for, influenza. So our Tamiflu, there's Tamiflu caches. They also can supply vaccinations. So if we do have a pandemic of influenza, they can help ramp up that response by getting the state's influenza vaccines, kind of similar to the H1N1 response when we needed to vaccinate individuals because that strain was not actually put into that flu shot that year. So,
good, excellent. All right, so. Maybe we could talk about some of the natural disasters that happen in the state. I mean, specifically one that's near and dear to our hearts here in Montana are wildfires. We obviously have had several seasons where that's been a huge issue. And so, in talking about how even that affects people's health, I know we only have maybe a minute or so left in this segment, but maybe we can talk a little bit about why wildfire smoke is harmful, how that kind of fits into things. Greg, maybe you can talk a little bit about that?
Well, I think, wildfires, there's two different ways of thinking of it. There's probably lots of different ways, but one is the direct effect of, do you need to evacuate, get out of your house? Is there going to be damage here, direct risk to the fires? And then there's the smoke in the air that I think all Montanans have dealt with in the last few years, and what kind of effect that will have on you. And so there's different ways that, we can prepare. Some of it is if you have asthma or some respiratory diseases that you have the medications available. I think one of the challenging part is those people that have what we call intermittent asthma. They're just occasionally using their inhalers, and they're thinking, well, I'll just get that one, the next time I have a chance. You need to have backup. You need to have stuff that is there. For people that have heart disease or lung diseases, these are other areas that you can also have some challenges. And we can go into more detail if you'd like to.
That sounds great. Maybe we'll pause here for just a quick break and come back and hit on some of those topics again here shortly. So coming up next, how to handle health and safety concerns no matter the disaster or weather. We have more information and some very important tips for you. Don't go away. We'll be right back. Welcome back. Regardless of severe weather or natural disaster that's hit, there can be common health and safety concerns, and that means common precautions that you can take from suffering injury or illness. Matt Matich and Dr. Holzman are still with us to provide some tips. Welcome back, gentlemen.
Thank you.
So we were discussing wildfires previous to the break, and Greg, maybe you can elaborate a little bit more on what's really in wildfire smoke, this particulate matter. Talk a little bit about what that means and why that is dangerous to folks especially with pre-existing health conditions.
Right. So, anything can be in it depending on what's burning. So you can get toxic materials depending on what's also burning on it. But some of the common things that we think about is the particulate matter. Some of the larger particulate matter and the smaller particulate matter. And then the other thing to always remember is carbon monoxide. So the 2 points, if the thicker, bigger particle matter, those are the things that cause those irritation, your irritated eyes, your runny nose, your scratchy throat, that kind of stuff that lets you know that it's in the air. That stuff you feel like when you're around a campfire and in the smoke area of it or something like that. The small particulate matter can get down into your lungs, and that's a problem in a lot of different ways. One, if you're prone to asthma, or sometimes you don't even know you're prone to asthma, this might be your first experience, it causes irritation. You could get bronchial spasms and stuff like that, making it harder to breathe, or an asthma exacerbation. But it also can cause irritation and swelling and those type of things that make air more difficult to exchange. And so again, you're having lower oxygen getting into or concerned about getting oxygen there. The other one is carbon monoxide, and that's an odorless gas, but that has better binding to the hemoglobin, which is the actual molecules that carry your oxygen around your blood system to your muscles and specifically to your heart and brain. So somebody that might be more prone or a very high level of that carbon monoxide can start having carbon monoxide poisoning. They might get really drowsy. You can also not be getting enough oxygen to important organs like your heart, and somebody that might be more prone or already having difficulty and they're under higher stress to their heart could have a heart attack. So these are things that people need to just be aware of and thinking about those symptoms and what they're having. One, be prepared to try to prevent as much as we possibly can, but two, also to be ready to call if they're having some symptoms that might feel like a heart attack or other problems.
Good information. Talking about being prepared, I think sometimes people feel like getting some of those dust masks from a local hardware store or something might be helpful to prevent issues with wildfire smoke. Is that a myth, or is that a reality?
It's a great thought, and I've even seen it when it was really bad. Somebody put a bunch of them up on a tree, just trying to be nice to their neighbors, saying, use this if you need it. But it actually can cause more harm, and it's definitely things. The small particulate matter can still get through those dust masks. With it over your mouth, just as any mask, it's a little bit more difficult to breathe. And so it really isn't very helpful in that. You can get what we call a N95 mask, a respirator. Those type of masks are better, and they do work well. Some people will say they keep them in their house just in case if they needed to get through a situation where they're going to go through the smoke. But that's something you really should talk to your healthcare provider about. Because it is harder to breathe through that, and so just trying to, and sometimes they need to be fitted and stuff of that sort. But the dust mask, they really don't help, and it's not helpful for the wildfire smokes.
Good, thank you. Let's move on to spring and flooding. And obviously we've had flooding around the state of Montana, so maybe we can talk a little bit about what some of the health concerns are associated with flooding. Either of you?
Good, Matt.
So some of the health concerns that we are looking at with flooding, obviously once the flooding goes away, mold within the household. Other things that we are looking at are debris within the floodwaters, making sure that we stay out of those floodwaters in case there are things that, we can get poked on or, cut ourselves. So there are those health concerns with flooding. Also, fast-moving water, so driving in flooded waters can take your vehicle away pretty easily. So making sure that you use routes that aren't in the flood zone.
And so some of the other things, and this would go with any emergency, but flooding is a good example of it. Know where your resources are. So who can you call? What stations should you be listening to where you can get the information? A lot of times, the younger kids, you'll have to explain what it is, a transistor radio or something, with the batteries that you can have if your electricity, so what are the evacuation routes that you can get out of and which ones you can't get out of. Other things with flooding, though, that also think about, you might think, well, we're not affected by the flooding. It didn't happen in my area. I know it's happening in another area in my community. Make sure that the water is okay, because your water can get infected, and there might be a boil order that you need to know about so that you're not drinking the tap water until it's been okayed. Again, having those resources, whether we have a lot of state websites you can go to or in your community, so you can find out what needs to be done and you're best prepared.
Perfect. And so in the last minute we have here in this segment, maybe we can just highlight earthquakes. Montana's a seismically active state. Any quick tips regarding earthquakes, safety preparedness, or any resources quickly to point folks to that you would have to mention?
Well, there's information on websites that we can give you and to look at. Again, and I think we'll talk a little bit more later on this, but having a plan. So, where are people going to meet afterwards? Where's the safe place that you're going to go to in your home? They talk about getting undercover and getting yourself locked, drop undercover and locked. You want to be safe about that. You don't want to be where things might fall over on top of you. These are things that you want to think about during the earthquake. Then there's a lot of things you need to think about after the earthquake. Because there's risk, know where your electrical, where you can turn that off if you need to, or your gas, and we could go on and on.
Thank you. We'll pause for a quick break and talk a little bit more in a few minutes here. When we come back, the best way to recover from severe weather or disaster is to be prepared before anything ever happens. We have some readiness tips for you coming up next. Stay tuned. Welcome back. Sometimes we're informed about approaching severe weather, and sometimes natural disasters strike without warning. Either way, there are steps you can take to be prepared regardless of the event. We're still talking with Matt Matich and Dr. Holzman. Welcome back again, gentlemen. So Matt, I'm going to go right to you, and let's talk a little bit about stocking up on food and water. How much do you need? How do you safely store it? Things like that.
That's a perfect question. So obviously being prepared before a disaster hits is extremely important. And one of the ways that you can do that is by preparing a kit. And so one of the ways that you can do that is obviously stockpiling food and water. And food and water should be at a minimum 30 or 72 hours worth of food and water. And with water, you're kind of looking at 1 gallon per person per 72 hours.
Okay.
So
Per day.
per day.
person.
Yes, sorry.
Yeah.
And so you're really looking at that for not only the people within your household, but also pets.
Okay.
And then also food. You want to make sure that the food that you are stockpiling is, canned goods, non-perishable, even sometimes the, dried foods that you can just add water to. Something that, isn't going to necessarily expire relatively quickly.
Sure.
And that can be put into, a kit for later on.
Okay. Any other supplies other than food and water for personal care that you might want to have on hand?
Yeah, definitely. A flashlight is always good to have. Also, some batteries and
Okay.
extra batteries, and you want to go in and check that, but that's going to be available. As we talked about in an earlier segment, a transistor radio or something that you can get a hold of
Sure.
things. In this day and age where we all live by our cell phones, do you have extra energy to put into that? Do you have a little energy
Okay.
stick? But you got to make sure those things are up to
Sure.
date, because it's easy to go in there and say, oh, these batteries are from 1964 or
Sure,
whatever,
exactly.
So those things are all important.
Let's talk about medications and prescriptions. So that's a biggie for people, and what are the recommendations regarding how to do that?
A lot of times with the medications, you always want to have a good supply, especially if they're life requiring medications. Sometimes people say put 7 to 10 days within in that stockpile
Okay.
right there, so you have it. But there's also medications that maybe need to be refrigerated, and
Sure.
then you get into the problem if the electricity goes out and stuff like that. So have your prescriptions, know what your medications are, write them down. I use my cell phone a lot. I write them down and take a picture of it.
Yes.
Then you have that so that you can, if you need those medications, we can get it from a different provider if
Sure.
your provider is not available. There was issues with Katrina, as we talked about before. Those individuals came out of Katrina and were going to all different states, and then they might have needed their diabetes medicines or something like that. We're not going to get it from their regular doctor. So having those things available and on hand is really important to know what your medications are.
Keeping that current list, that
Yeah.
makes good sense.
Yeah.
How about any documents, specific documents people should have readily accessible and be able to get to quickly? Recommendations?
So obviously making sure that you have insurance information and identification. Like Dr. Holzman said, it's as easy as just having a picture of it. Other documentations, I kind of said something about pets earlier, also making sure that you have vaccination records, not only for you, but also for your pets, in case you do have to evacuate. Knowing your vaccination records is extremely important. Other documentation.
Again, I use my phone sometimes to do this, but I can't see without my glasses. Now, of course, I have extra pairs, but if I couldn't get to it or I needed something like that, I've taken a picture of the script that I have for that so that I could go to any eye doctor and say, I need these if something was to happen. So just kind of thinking those things through. They're not bad to have when it's not even an emergency, but you got one on your trip somewhere and then all of a sudden you realize you forgot something,
Sure.
back home, that we all make those mistakes. You have it.
That's a good point. How about having a grab and go bag, something that is just readily accessible that, is that a good idea, just to have something ready that you can just pick up and go with? Is that a recommendation?
Definitely. So at any point in time, if it is wildfires, we deal with those a lot. If you need to evacuate quickly, ensuring that you have clothing and also those food and water supplies ready to go. So those disaster kits shouldn't be, we all may have those flashlights and the water like strung throughout our house, but making sure that they're, in a ready to go either tote or even a bag that can be easily just grabbed and taken out of your house in case you do have to evacuate quickly is definitely always recommended.
And another point to think about, especially in Montana, is your car. We're on long roads, something happens. Also with the weather, if something happens,
Sure.
to have something in your car, that same tote bag, you could have one in your car and one in your house. Also thinking about in your car for the season, what you might need to be worrying about.
Absolutely.
You also may also want to consider work. We
Yeah.
spend a lot, if we're at work, we spend a lot of time there,
Sure.
and so making sure that we have, those types of resources within our workspace as well.
Very good point. We have about a minute left. Is there a good website, good resource, and we can put it up on the screen that people can go to get a checklist of those items to put in a preparedness kit to have ready? Is that available on any resources you guys have available?
Yeah, so obviously going to ready.gov is always a great resource. There are also resources at the Montana ready.gov
Okay.
as well.
Perfect. Thank you. I want to thank both of you very much for joining us today. It was a pleasure to visit with you. Thank you for tuning in this week. Be sure to join us again next week. Until then, stay fit, stay well, and stay healthy for life with Healthy Living for Life.
Healthy Living for Life is brought to you by Mountain Pacific Quality Health. We'd love to hear from you. If you have suggestions for future programs, visit our website at mpqhf.org or call us at 406-443-4020. You can also catch us on YouTube by visiting our website and clicking on the YouTube icon. Special thanks to Fire Tower Coffee House and Roasters. Production facilities provided by Video Express Productions.